Welcome to BluebirdPS, from nesting to hatched and flying. And yeah, so want to thank all of our sponsors. Without them, we wouldn't be able to, have Summit. And I'm not sure if I think they probably already have taken down their tables and things like that. But anyway, yeah, go check them out. So who is Dave Carroll? I'm a DevOps engineer, PowerShell developer, not the team, but just I work with PowerShell just like everyone here. I've been automating with PowerShell since around 2.0 days in 2009. I've been blogging about PowerShell and other techie stuff since 2018. I contributed to the PowerShell conference books, volumes 2 and 3, and I've created just a small selection of public modules. And I've been solving IT problems for nearly 30 years. I've been using these QR codes because I think it's a lot easier to scan that than to go, try to click on or type in the link or see the link, especially from far back. All right, so let's talk about the elephant in the room. As of April 4th, Twitter Inc. no longer exists as a separate entity. Additionally, there's going to be significant changes to the Twitter API access tiers, which is going to directly impact the functionality of BluebirdPS. We're going to get into the access tiers a little later, and also the fate of BluebirdPS. Now, when I had the idea for this talk, I was unsure about the future of BluebirdPS even then. But this session is ultimately about cradle-to-grave lifecycle management of a PowerShell module for an API. Okay, let's start over. This is the design and lifecycle discussion of a PowerShell module for an API, aka BluebirdPS from cradle to grave. So Bluebird is a PowerShell 7 hybrid manifest module for the Twitter REST API. It has a .NET assembly written in C# that I use primarily for output. And we're going to maybe take a look at some of those aspects about Bluebird itself, but in general, we're going to be looking at basic framework and structure of a module, and what kind of design choices that you should consider if you're going to create a module. So pretty much that's going to be the agenda. Our design considerations, module components, maybe a Bluebird tour, the changes, what next, and just a couple, like 2 or 3 links at the end. So design considerations. When you're creating a module, one of the first things that you should really think about is, what am I going to call it? Especially if it's a module that is, could potentially, gain notoriety, or if it's a module that's going to be, associated with a particular brand. So you want to be able to brand your own module. And I think I reached out to the PowerShell community, and we eventually got to BluebirdPS for this module. And that started, started me going down the path of what's the next step? So I've got the name of it. Now, is anyone else using BluebirdPS or Bluebird to describe a, Twitter module? Well, first I looked on the PowerShell gallery, then I looked in the copyright and trademark government website to see, has anybody else ever, have they used that? And I think there was maybe a Bluebird client that was like a thick client, but it definitely was not PowerShell related. So I figured BluebirdPS is probably going to be unique enough, so let me get that. So that's when I started, and in 2021, I actually registered the bluebirdps.dev domain. So it definitely needs to be unique. And again, it's going to be considered, part of your branding. Just last year, I had the Reverend Geek to do a couple of icons, and logos for this. So, for this dying bird. But anyway, it looked great for a few months. Really, it did. So whenever you're creating a module, one of the next thing you should think about is, what PowerShell version should I support? Are you going to be, do you need to support version 2? Do you need to support version 3, 4, whatever? And this was sort of a greenfield module for me, and I thought, I'm going to just target PowerShell 7. It's going to be cross-platform. I won't have to worry about the differences between the web commandlets between PowerShell 5, 5.1 and 7. And also 7 is a long-term service-seed release. So it's going to be PowerShell 7 support, and that's it. And since I was the one that was in charge, I said yeah. I know there's some modules that have to support, much earlier versions of PowerShell. I don't know exactly how far back DBA tools goes, but I think they support quite a bit. So the next thing is it going to require authentication, and if so, how should the authentication be handled? The Twitter API uses 2 or 3 different types of authentication. Of course, if you're using another, if you're going to be creating a module to go against another API, whatever they use is what you have to deal with. Sometimes the authentication is going to be session-based, like with the Dyn Managed DNS API. So with that, you basically get your token. Your token's good for maybe a couple of hours or something along those lines. With Twitter, once you get your tokens and things, it's good until they decide to change the Twitter API. Which could be any day, multiple times during the day. So some of the things that you need to have, also consider with this is, if I have, long-term credentials, I need to store them somewhere. So I created something that basically does an encryption to secure string and convert back from secure string, and just essentially had a hash table that I converted to JSON. We can maybe look at that a little later. But like with the Posh Dyn DNS API module, I didn't need to actually store anything. It was just going to be a module variable that's going to be available. So like whenever you do the connect, you're going to essentially log in at that point and then go forward. But that also brings up something else too. So if you have a connect commandlet, you're going to need to have a disconnect commandlet or a refresh connection type commandlet. If it's something that you do have to do a refresh. So the next thing is, if you're going against a large API, what endpoints or what functionality do you need to support? With Twitter, basic functionality, it'll be tweeting something, or maybe getting a user, or maybe doing a search, maybe posting something. With the Posh Dyn DNS API, it was about creating a new domain to manage, or about creating a new A record, CNAME, whatever record that you need. But you can't look at an API, let's say the Graph API. If you were to start writing a module that is going to consume that, you'll never finish if you want to create a module that's going to consume every one of those, unless you do it programmatically, maybe with OpenAPI or something like that in Swagger. But in general, if you're going to be doing it, each command tailored to how you want to design it, you should start small and then, iterate through, like with this version, I'm going to be adding this functionality. The next version, I'm going to add this functionality. And also, like, are there any specific product or API considerations that you need to consider? Like with the Twitter API v2, there are things called field expansions and field expansions. I think there's something else. It slips my mind now. But essentially, the instead of returning all of the properties on an object, they return you like a default set of properties, kind of like the get AD user, where if you want more than just what they think that you might want to use all the time, you'll need to specify in the dash properties and add those. So one of the things that I decided is like, I don't want the end user to have to deal with which properties do I want. So I'm just going to return all the properties. And on the expansions, it's like for a tweet, an expansion would be the authors of the tweets, or maybe the people that are referenced in the tweets. So instead of returning that always, I decided to create a like an include expansions switch for pretty much all of my commands. So if they want to get the users, or like if they're going after a user, maybe they want the pinned tweet or something like that. So the include expansions allows the user to choose on the fly. Also, like there might be different tiers of the API. Like with the Twitter API, there's an academic research tier that gives them access to all the tweets in the history of tweets. But if you don't have that, if you're not an academic, then you're going to be limited to the last 7 days if you do a search. So those limitations that are part of the API itself needs to be included in your documentation, just so someone wouldn't think, oh wait, shouldn't I be getting more? And then create an issue. Then you have to go in and say, no, that's not the case. I think I backed up, didn't I? Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the authentication for APIs. There's OAuth version 1, which is user context. Originally, it was the default for BluebirdPS, and it's the Twitter API version 1.1 standard. And essentially, you call an endpoint, and you get back like the JWT, the token, yeah. Also, Twitter was one of the first originating contributors to OAuth 1. I think what they started like in 2006 became eventually OpenID. Yeah, OpenID. And then they also, not recently, a few years back, added the OAuth 2, which is the bearer token, and that is the JWT. And also, there's some, like with the bearer token, you only get the publicly accessible data. But if you wanted to do something on behalf of yourself or another person, then you would have to use like the PKCE or some other sub authentication piece on the OAuth v2. So the next thing, once you have your authentication concept, then you should think about your internal, your private functions. Those would include the authentication request. And also, when you're going against an API, not all APIs will give you all the data back. So like if you're on Facebook or on other sites and you start scrolling and all of a sudden you see like the little wait symbol at the bottom of the list, it's actually doing another API call to get paged or cursored requests from that API. And it requires iteration. Over the course of the last 3 or 4 years of BluebirdPS, I got the iteration down to where I'm not having to have like different essentially invoke web request wrappers for the paged or non-paged requests. I'm able to iterate within. The next thing is you need to parse your output. Any responses that comes back, you should consider having like an output type for your particular command. Also, errors are output as well. So you should produce, proper error records, throw proper exceptions that will help the user figure out what they did wrong, or potentially figure out a bug that you actually created yourself. For the BluebirdPS, there's invoke Twitter request, and then for like the output, I have write Twitter response that as soon as the response comes back from the API, it gets piped into the right Twitter response. It does things, and then if necessary, it'll throw a new Twitter error record. Yeah. So in general, best practices for an API module, or maybe any module, you should always do the verb noun naming scheme, and it should be proper or approved verbs that you get from the get verb. You should also consider using advanced functions. Pretty much anything that has like if you have either the command binding attribute, or if you add any attribute to any parameter, like parameter mandatory or validate set, things like that, I think it automatically implies that it's a advanced function. And with the advanced functions also, you should consider being able to accept input from the pipeline, and also use the the begin, process, and end blocks. And I think there's a new block that's coming out soon, I believe, that lets you do cleanup. I forget exactly the name of it. Then also you should do parameter validation, just to make sure that what you're sending to the API is what they allow. If you're sending an integer, but they actually need a string, there could be some easy conversion. If you're sending a string, but it needs to be an integer, then that's probably not going to be a good thing. The parameter validation also brings to the user, it shortens the feedback loop on any errors, so they'll be able to if you give them the right type of error message, they should be able to correct the problem that they've injected themselves. Also, you should use the should process decorator. I think maybe not decorator. You should use should process for anything that does remove. Potentially anything that also does set. It kind of depends on what you're dealing with. And you should include module help, and that could be either context-based help, or it can be external help, like created by Platypus. That's usually what most people do. It helps. I mean, it's a lot easier. Also with the module help, like with Bluebird, I have the module help is hosted with Read the Docs, and it's hosted at the BluebirdPS.dev website or URL. Also, one thing to consider is maybe having some way that the user can go back and see what command that they've issued or and what response they got. I've done this for this module and also for the Posh.Dyn DNS API. And a couple of years ago, when I started working with AWS and using their modules, it's like, oh, they have their own little history thing too, so it must not have been a bad idea. Typically for me, that's maybe a history class that you would have as a potentially as just a module variable, and then you just add, that's a list, and then you just add to that whenever you do the calls. And I think for Bluebird, that is where, when I do the right response, that's where I put that information. It's possible that it still could be in the invoke Twitter request, but we might look at that a little later. If you have, issued a command and maybe you have a limited number of times that you can hit that particular endpoint, if you had the response, it might be easier just to get that, from your local. If you said, well, I just did that, 10 minutes ago, and I don't need that fresh, the data to be refreshed or whatever. So I'm just going to go back to that and maybe not go through and hit that API again. And also in your module, there's going to be two types of public functions. They're going to be the ones that calls the API endpoints and the ones that don't call API endpoints. Like the ones that don't call API endpoints would be the ones that does your response output, would be your error output, and it would be like any helper stuff or like accessing the history of your of the commands and accessing the configuration potentially. So that's kind of what I did with Bluebird. So I think Joel yesterday mentioned something about having the output type defined for your, for each of your commands. One of the ways he mentioned was doing a PS custom object with a type name. That may not necessarily be the best way to go, but it is a way to go. Also, you can use obviously a PowerShell custom class and or a .NET class. Now, the bonus about and in your function or your commandlet, you can put output type. And for some of the commands like, get Twitter user, get tweet, anything like that, and if you include the expansions, which means it's going to get the other component, users and tweets, you might not realize that output type can be more than one type from the same command. And it's like for the get Twitter user, it's going to be the Twitter user class object type and then the tweet object type. And you don't have to worry about if it's a list or if it's a single. Just put the type that it's going to be. Doing this is very helpful. So like when you're doing a where object, it will look at the type and then let you do tab completion for the property that you want to filter on or whatever. One of the good things about having a class, whether it's custom or .NET, is that you can use class inheritance. You have to be smart about class inheritance when you're using the PowerShell custom classes themselves. You have to define the lowest level that you inherit from at the top, and then everything that is inherited has to be lower than the parent. Like for the Twitter object, that was like the very base class that I have for Bluebird. And it's got the original object, which is just the raw data that comes back from Twitter itself, and then the get original object that lets you actually return that if you need to. So maybe let's get into a little bit of Bluebird if you want. Again, all of these commands, almost all of these commands are going to be valid until Saturday, I think.
Yes.
All right, so I need to stop the thing. Just a second. Is that looking good in the back or toward the back? Yeah, so there's quite a few commands that I put into this over the years. And again, not that many years, just some. Let's say we wanted to look at anything that is authenticated or has to do with authentication. So I recently added the show Twitter authentication. So I don't mind because it's going to go away. Oh, are you sure you want to show this? This is going to be some things that you don't want shared. Are you sure? Yeah, I don't care. So this is basically the output. In fact, let me. I did that again. I think I did that last night. So this BluebirdPS Twitter authentication, that's the class that I wrote. We've got these properties. And this, when it lives on the disk, it's actually JSON. And let me see if I can pull that up. Also, I put it in my I put this your configuration for Bluebird. I put it in your home directory underneath like a .bluebird or whatever. So if we look at the credential file, so this is just encrypted back and forth. So you can't actually, if you were to get this, you're not going to be able to do much about it. And so since I had a lot of custom or classes that I wrote, I decided I wanted to do this. So all of these are individual classes or enums that are out there. And I like having all of these, the hierarchy. And since we have API v1 and API v2 are like drastically different, I wanted to keep those separate as well. So like one of the Bluebird history. So like this is one of the things that would happen. So the last thing that actually ran was the import Twitter authentication, which that has something internal that goes out and authenticates the authentication that you say that you have. And I have another, actually no, this was just a new clean. We might do this, I think. Okay. So, I'm not sure if you know this guy. He's pretty cool. Yeah, right there. But yeah, so this, I just ran this command, and then I can go back to my Bluebird history, and I see this is the URI that actually got sent, and the end user didn't need to know all of the fields that they need to do, because like I said, I just wanted to give all the fields entirely. If we were to look at, and again, this is not showing you how to do it with Bluebird. This is showing you what you could do with one of your own modules. So if we do this and then the data, actually API response. So the API response, this is the JSON that comes back, and the data. So this is the straight up data with the snake case and all that. And if I wanted to turn this, yeah, so that's the actual JSON. One of the things about this would be so include expansions. And now if I do this user, you don't have a pinned tweet, huh? So I guess I can show one thing here too. So let's do the help for get Twitter user. Yeah, it actually doesn't show that this has multiple parameter sets because I don't use multiple parameter sets. But you can see that user itself is optional. Also, you can see that it could take a string. So I could do, actually, that looks good there. So I'm going to grab these from the help, because your help should always have all your like one example for your parameter sets, and also any other examples that may be necessary. So I'm doing a look for the Bluebird user itself, Steve Lee, and myself. And the way this works is pretty neat. I think I showed somebody yesterday, but so we got like maybe what 12, 14 minutes left, something like that. Let's see where I am in this, because I don't want to spend like too much time on that. Oh. We'll tell Steve. Why not? Yeah. Boom. Okay. So that just tweeted, right? Also, this editable controls. If you paid for the blue, then you could edit until like I don't know how long, but you can only edit 5 times. Yeah. So this is the text that came back. Somebody yesterday actually put in an issue because they now have the free version, which does not let you get any tweets back. So just the endpoint that creates the tweet is one API call. But I thought that the user would need to see what they just tweeted, to either get the ID or whatever. So I ended up in the command to go get the tweet that I just created. Right. So now I have to consider, do I need to remove that and then publish? So let's. I'm going to get the get tweet ID of this because there was one other thing too. I don't think I mentioned earlier. So if we look at this, you see the edit controls and then is editable, true, all this is a comma thing. That is because I changed the toString. I overrode the toString on that particular class. I like having these things as opposed to doing something. I think I have this somewhere, or maybe I don't now. Yeah, well, I think you guys can maybe see that. It was in the slide notes. So instead of saying like public metrics, BluebirdPS, basically the type name is what you get if you, because that's what the toString is by default. I like overriding that so it doesn't actually. Yeah, I mean, and just do it as succinct as possible. It just makes a lot of sense. So we can continue on here. So the Twitter API itself, the first one was produced in 2006, and V11 was dropped 2013. V2 was dropped 2020, and the new tiers for V2, April 29th. Hey, that's in the future, by 2 days. The free tier is you can tweet up to 1,500 times per month. And that's it. Technically, I think you can also get your own user, which is good because whenever I have my authentication set up, I actually use that to get the user ID, which is needed for some of the other API calls. Everybody sitting? If you want to pay for basic, it's only $100 a month. Only $100 a month. But this would unlock pretty much everything in Bluebird. So if anyone wants me to continue developing for Bluebird beyond maybe doing a couple of fixes here and there, I would need to have, I guess, set up a Patreon and somebody. Yeah. So yeah, that's that. So what's next? Should I publish a version, the last version, to remove like the error when publishing a new tweet? Maybe. I don't know. I definitely need to update the documentation and things like that. It says, hey, if you're rich, and can afford $100, maybe if you can afford $200, I can assist. Also, the next thing is something like, one of the use cases for this in my mind was, I'm going to create a thing that I'm going to be able to publish, like when I announce a new blog post or whatever. Haven't actually done that yet. So what now should I do? Should I maybe create a new module that is just like Poster or something like that, and you can configure it for Twitter, for LinkedIn, for any of those others? I think that might be the way that I go. Actually, as a show of hands, who would be interested in a module that could post against multi social media platforms. Okay. That's probably good enough for me to work on that. So that's really it. Here's my three links. So it's my blog, same thing down there. That's my Mastodon account, and that's LinkedIn. These are my three primary places, not in the same order, probably blog, LinkedIn, and Mastodon. I might maybe do some posting on Twitter, but it's going to be less. I mean, I've been doing all the retweets and stuff like that for PS Summit because, you know, PS Summit is worth, you know, giving more clicks to dumpster fire of Twitter. So anyway, yeah, I think that's it. Anybody have any questions?
It's just amazing when you finish off that they follow me on Mastodon.
So the question was, have I had any contributors, code or financial? Financial, no. Code, I had one person, I think, maybe Alex, I forget his last name, in France, and he kind of got me interested in doing some of the new stuff, like maybe a year and a half ago. And then I think there was another person that originally helped me with the, or made some suggestions for the authentication piece early on.
Nice work. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
So early on, you were mentioning that you had to save the file, you know, for the authentication, the token. You know, I've always kind of struggled with where to save that. You know, especially if you're doing like user profiles across platform.
So this is in version 1, and you see this is ENV Home. The new version is, I have to use is Windows, and it's user profile. So version 1, Jeff Hicks, hey, I'm going to download that. I'm going to try it. It's got an error, dude. Thank you. So version 1.1 fixed that. But yeah, just getting it out there and getting someone to use it. And essentially, the home directory is going to be, I would think, the best place. And then just whatever your module name is, use a .dad because that way it's hidden in some, you know, in some places. Yeah, the question was where to put like any configuration files or long living files for modules. Yeah, and I guess. Does anybody, we got a couple of minutes. Anybody else have any other questions? All of this is up on GitHub. You can look at, you know, it's like the Dave Carroll / I probably should have had a QR code for that. The Dave Carroll / BluebirdPS. And you can see how I did like my build script. You can see how I did the .NET solution, because actually all that stuff I used actual Visual Studio, the daddy of Visual Studio Code. And I just found it a little, I don't know, it felt right. No other reason. Yeah, oh yeah, so this is how like I create the, like a last response. I think I did global so I wouldn't have to, I don't know why I did global. I probably could have just done module based. But this this Bluebird, like if you declare a module, sorry, a variable in your PSM1, that's actually a module variable, and you can't use that outside of the PSM1, you know, once you have it imported. Also, I saw this from I think Warren Frame, where he like when you do when you remove a module from your session, you can clean up any variables or something like that. So. Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Oh, did you?
No, so
It's surprising that Twitter seems to have had that long a life cycle for the APIs, right? That's 7 years in between versions. It seems.
it kind of speaks to two things. It speaks to, sorry, the life of a particular version of the Twitter API was what was asked about. So the larger the company, the more use that something gets, it's going to create an amount of inertia that has to be overcome. It has to be overcome by people, and you know, I know there were different teams that worked on particular things in different parts. So did I find anything that was not documented properly? Yes, especially, and I think so with the version 1.1, the documentation, some of their tables was horrific. They didn't use a table correctly. So, and you know, if you have a column for name on one, down below there might actually be something else of a different type of data in that. Yeah, so there's that, and there were some just omissions like in the V2 stuff, like, hey, I can actually run this, but you said that you don't accept this type of authentication. I did that. Oh yeah, it's okay. Anyway, so how do we keep an API module strictly in PowerShell, essentially, right? That would go look at the Posh.dyn DNS API that is entirely in PowerShell. And by the way, that one is also going to die in May. That's because Oracle bought them, and then they're migrating to the OCI. Yeah, so this Posh.dyn DNS API and classes, I put everything in just one, and this is how I do my classes here. I don't think I have any like methods on this, but anyway, I think that's it. I need to probably give this over to, actually, we need to eat. All right. Thank you.